let's talk about the process, and then we'll jump into the demos, and we'll see what this looks like. So we're gonna create our new Windows cluster with our new servers. We're gonna create our availability group, and then we're going to do a migration. Right? We're going to migrate all of our objects that we talked about a few slides ago, including our databases to the new AG, right? And the purpose of this is a test migration, right? At this point in our new environment, we have everything is there. We have a new listener, we have our logins, we have our data, we can point application servers, users, we can test to our heart's content, right? We have a primary replica that's writable and one or more secondary replicas. Once we're done with all of that, we're going to go through a process to initialize the distributed AG. To create the distributed AG, this is going to require, fresh restores of the databases. At this point, they're going to be in standby mode on the secondary. They're not writable. They're not usable. They're just sitting there, taking that replication traffic. Okay. At cutover time, we're going to take an outage, whatever we have to do to ensure that, no data is being changed in the primary or source AG. We're going to make sure that the AGs are fully synchronized, and then we're going to fail over to the new AG. And that's it. And it's just as fast as failovers that you're used to in regular AGs. And that's what the beauty of this is that if you're in an environment where you need to have your cutover be, even minutes, you can do that, right? If what we recommend and what most people are doing is you're using a DNS name for your listener. So literally what you're going to do at go live time, you're going to take an outage on your existing, you're going to fail over, and you're going to update DNS to point to the new listener, and you're done, right? It's actually that easy. Okay, so with all that said, let's jump over to some of our tools here and take a look at what we have. And what we are starting this process with for this demo is two availability groups. One that's on SQL Server 2016. We can see that one. I'm just looking at the AG dashboard here. We can see we have two replicas, a primary, a secondary. They're in synchronous. There's one small database in that AG. And we've already done that initial migration piece, right? So over on our SQL Server 22 environment, we have the same thing, right? Primary, secondary. We have the database over there. We did all this migration. We've done that testing, right? So what we're going to look at here, if we go back to that process that we talked about, is, basically these last two steps, right? Initialize the distributed availability group, and then how we would actually do the failover. Okay? All right. So that's what we have. We have these four servers, 2016 A and B, 2022 A and B, and then I have connections to the listeners for those, and we'll just kind of take a look at what we have as we go through this. Now, one thing to point out about distributed AGs when it comes to, at least in SSMS, the dashboards, we don't have the instrumentation in SSMS for distributed AGs that we have for regular AGs. So there is some minimal stuff that we'll see, but one of the things, again, if you've attended many of our webinars, you know that we are big users of SolarWinds SQL Sentry. And so one of the things I'm going to do as part of this is show you the always on kind of piece of SQL Sentry, because it actually does have some distributed AG stuff that's pretty interesting. So just briefly to look at that, to kind of familiarize you, I'm looking at the always on dashboard in SQL Sentry. This is the 2016 availability group, and it gives me all kinds of information, right? I can see the clusters. Like, I mean, if you go down here, I can see listeners, databases, replicas. If I go to a specific replica and I go over here to chart, and obviously there's not much going on here right now, but I can see, my replication latency, my log send queue, all of those things, right? For my primaries and my secondaries, right? And the same thing for the 2022 primary and secondary, right? So we have these AGs, great. And what we're going to see is that as we build out the distributed AG, SQL Sentry actually gives us some views into that the regular SSMS dashboards don't. Of course, all of this is available via T-SQL scripts as well. This is just it gives you a way to kind of see what's going on. So what we're going to start with is this script here, initialize the distributed AG. Okay. So, and you'll notice I'm using SQL command mode in Management Studio here, which if you're not familiar with that, you just go to the query menu, SQL command mode, and it allows you to, in one script, connect to multiple servers, run commands, connect to another server. So in situations like this, it's really useful. So what we're going to start with is number one, in order to create a distributed AG, there cannot be any databases on the secondary AG, right? So if I go look at that 2022 AG, we have this AG dummy database. That's our database we're testing with for the demo, right? That's synchronized. We have the replicas. We have a listener, right? Everything. This is just a normal AG. And so what I'm going to do is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the database from the availability group, and then I'm going to delete the database from all of the replicas on the 2022 boxes. So we'll start with that, right? So I'm just going to execute that. And once that's done, we'll go see that the databases are completely gone, right? So if I go, looks like we're done with the primary, right? So the database is no longer there. If I go to look at the availability group databases, nothing there. And of course, if I go to the secondary, right? I have that up here. The database has been actually, it has not been deleted. Let's see. Oh, we'll do it the hard way and have it build connections. So close existing connections. All right. So we now have our secondary AG ready to be set up as the distributed AG. And of course, if we go to our dashboard now, it's not gonna look healthy, right? Because there's no databases, right? So there's nothing to synchronize, and that's okay. That's what we expect. Okay, our next step, we want to make sure that all of our endpoints, that we are listening on all IP addresses, and then we're going to create the distributed availability group. And so what that command looks like, it's very similar to the command to create a regular availability group. The difference is being, you're going to say with distributed, and the availability group on the list is not going to be SQL servers that will participate as replicas. It's going to be the AGs that will be part of this distributed availability group. So, as I said earlier, it's really an availability group of availability groups, right? It's important that we're connected to what we want to be the primary AG when we execute this, because I'm going to, list the AGs that will be participating in this. Whichever of those AGs I'm actually connected to will become the primary. The others will be secondaries. So we'll go ahead and execute that next portion here. We're going to check our endpoints first. We'll execute that. That's all good. We would have seen an error if there was a problem, right? And then we're going to run our command to create our distributed availability group. Okay. So now if I go to my 2016 availability groups, we can see that I have this availability group called distributed AG. Doesn't have any databases, doesn't have a listener, never will have a listener. But the replicas are these two AGs, right? As opposed to the servers that have replicas. Just like in a regular AG, the next step, we need to uh, connect to the secondary availability group listener and join the distributed availability group. So we're going to do that. Okay. At that point, we should see that our distributed AG has a primary and a secondary, but we don't have any databases. When using distributed AGs for upgrades, it requires manual seeding. You cannot use automatic seeding. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect to the listener of the primary AG. We're going to take a full backup of the database to a share that's accessible to both AGs. And then we're going to connect to both of the replicas in the secondary, restore that database, and join the availability group. So we'll start with the backup. Very small database, right? And then we're going to go to first the primary, or what really is called the forwarder now, the former primary replica of the secondary AG. We're going to restore that database with no recovery, right? Again, we need to leave it in a state that it can receive transactions. So we're going to do that on the forwarder. We're going to then join the database to the AG. We're going to restore that same backup to the secondary and join that to the availability group. Okay. At this point, we have a distributed availability group. We have a database. Come on, SSMS. It's not showing up there. But if we go to our dashboards, and we'll look at this in SQL Sentry as well, right? Our 2016 AG looks the same, right? It's the primary AG. But our secondary AG, and this is the part that I said to some people is disconcerting. The primary says that it's synchronized, but the secondary says that it's synchronizing, even though they're in synchronous commit. And this is just part of using this for upgrades. But what we're going to see is that the data is there and is being replicated. If we go to SQL Sentry, as I said, in Management Studio, the only thing that you're really going to see on the dashboard is the fact that the distributed AG exists, right? So you can see your distributed AG and your other AG, manual failover. But if you go click on that, you don't really get much information here, right? You get an error in the dashboard. SSMS just doesn't have the dashboard. But SQL Sentry does. So what we now see, you see that my view has updated. Let's see where I'm at. Yep. So here I am on the 2016 view, and it's showing me that I have this distributed AG. I have 2016 A and B, and it's going to take a minute for this to update. What we should see is we'll actually see it shows you this flow, right? And if you hover over that, you can see there's something going on with SQL Sentry, of course. So we can see that traffic. Anyway, and we'll come back to this, and hopefully SQL Sentry will have updated by then. Um, definitely acting kind of slow. Because what we should see is you'll see data flowing right to left from this primary to the distributed AG. And then when you click on that, it will actually open the AGs on 2022 and you'd see that data flow. And of course, you can see the traffic, you can see the replication, all of those things. So the next thing that we want to do is populate this dummy database in our 2016 environment with some data, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to drop and create a table called test inserts. And then we're going to run a loop, an indefinite loop that will just kill after 30 seconds or so to just, throw a bunch of rows into that table. And what's going to happen is that it's going to be synchronized on the primary AG, but then the primary AG will send it to the forwarder, which will in turn send it to the secondary on the secondary AG. So we'll go ahead and run that, create the table, and just start throwing some rows in there. We'll let that run for a bit. Let's go back to SolarWinds and see if it has become any happier. One of the things we can see here is, if we go to that always on, we should be able to see the traffic from this. Um, yeah, this is not updating the way that it should. So I actually had some issues with our lab SQL Sentry this morning and had to do some things with licensing. So, which I thought was resolved, but in any case, um, we have a bunch of data that's been, inserted on the primary, right? And so if I go look at that, we can see that we put 42,000 and some change rows into that table. So we're now initialized, right? We're probably doing this, a few days up to a week, however long before we have our scheduled actual production go live for this migration, right? And, we're monitoring that replication traffic. We're making sure everything is there. And then we're going to go to our actual failover, right? So what we're going to do, we will have taken an outage of some sort for the primary AG, right? So the data is no longer changing, right? And so we're going to change our distributed AG to synchronous commit, right? We don't necessarily want that typically up until this point because we don't want, the commits on the secondary AG to affect performance of the primary AG, right? We're just doing, asynchronous replication, keeping the data up to date, and we're going to go to synchronous at this point so that we can ensure the data is the same. Okay. So we're going to start with that. And then we're also going to run this query, which is going to tell us the commit state and the state of the replicas in the distributed AG. And if you look at this query, it's pretty much the same as what you would do with a regular AG. The only difference is you're saying where AG is distributed equals 1, right? So that I'm looking at the distributed AG. So we'll go ahead and execute that so we can see our two availability groups. They're synchronous, and our 2022 says partially healthy, right? Again, you have to kind of get used to that as part of using these for upgrade. Now what we're going to do is we're going to run a query, and one of the things that you can look at in the DMVs for availability groups is the last hardened log sequence number in that AG or on that replica, right? And if you're not familiar, log sequence number is kind of the primary key of the transaction log. And it tells us, this is the most recent transaction in this environment, right? And so log sequence is how, we can do transaction log backups and know that we're restoring data to appropriate point in time. We've done some webinars before on backups where we dig into that. So what we're going to do is we're going to look first at the 2016. We're going to run that query, and it's going to tell me for the 2016 AG for each of the replicas as well as the distributed AG, A, that they're synchronized, and B, that the last hardened LSN is this guy, right? We're going to run that exact same query on the 2022 listener. And what we should see, notice the secondary replica says synchronizing, not synchronized, right? Even though they're synchronous commit. But what we really care about is that LSN. And as long as that LSN is the same on all of the replicas, we know that they're in sync. Okay. And then we're going to do our failover, which is this simple, right? So we're going to connect to the listener of the new AG. We're going to execute the failover, and we are done. We are migrated, right? So, I've been talking a lot, and we've done this whole script in a minute or two? Not very long, right? We can now connect to the database on the 2022, and we can query our test inserts table. We see that all of our data is there. And that's the beauty of this, right? That yes, there's some setup that you have to do to, ensure that, your two AGs are ready and everything's working, create the distributed AG. But when you get to your actual go live, it's, as close to instantaneous as it can be, right? And Jason mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, we're actually doing a big project right now for one customer and some others that are in the process as well, using this methodology because they have environments that they just can't take a long outage, right? And what we have found doing this is that the long part of the outage tends to be, after the cutover, we have to update DNS. And, a lot of times, app servers have to be restarted to get the right IP address, things like that. That's the longer part of the migration. The database migration happens very quickly. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the distributed availability group. It has served its purpose. So I'm going to connect to both of those servers. I'll run that just a couple times to make sure it's gone. And now our distributed AG is gone. If we go now to our dashboards, we're going to see the 2022 AG is now completely independent. It's now happy and synchronized. The 2016 AG is still there, right? It's happy and synchronized, but we want to make darn sure that we don't have anybody connecting to this and changing data because, again, this is kind of a one-way trip, right? So that's distributed AGs. And it's a really great option for upgrading / migrating availability groups in environments where you can't sustain a long outage, and it works well. There's definitely some bits and pieces and things that you have to make sure that are in place. You need to make sure that all of your Surface accounts on all of your servers have access to all the endpoints, right? Networking things, the same types of things that you would see in a typical AG environment. So that's what we have. So again, this demo kind of started with a target availability group that we'd already done most of the migration, right? All the, the logins, the jobs, all those things that we talked about, right? And we just kind of went through how we would use a distributed AG for that, for the actual cutover.